Welcome to the Blueprint Podcast, where we throw out the old blueprints so you can become who you were always meant to be. I'm your host, Jason Smith, and if you haven't already, make sure you click the subscribe button and share this podcast with your friends on social media and tag me in it at JBirdFit. Today, I have a very special guest for you, Ciara Devereux. Ciara is a licensed psychotherapist, trauma, grief, and loss specialist, and public speaker based out of San Francisco. With a decade-long history in the therapeutic world, Ciara has done it all, from post-incarceration rehabilitation, inpatient treatment programs, addiction recovery, relationship counseling, to private practice. She continued to spread her knowledge and healing on platforms like TikTok, attempting to make self-growth accessible for all. Ciara, welcome to the Blueprint Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you have such a diverse background in the mental health space, with working with everything from addiction recovery to post-incarceration rehabilitation to relationship counseling. And then we just discovered you also do coaching as well. What led you to this field, and how has your work evolved over the years?
What led me to this field? I think, like most of us, the easy answer could be like, I'm just passionate about it. But the reality is, in order to be passionate about anything, you got to have a little history
A little lived
and
experience.
a little bit of lived experience. I was a deeply feeling kid, and I was a deeply feeling kid in an environment with no other deeply feeling people. And the product of that was somebody who had no fucking idea what to do, with no tools. And like all kids who don't have the skill set to handle anything, my family and life circumstances really required me to have some tools and get them fast. I fell into therapy. I fell into therapy kind of in an era before there was like a thing you talked about and a thing you did. And if you were a kid in therapy, it was usually like, "Ooh, like what's going on with that?" I met a wonderful clinician who actually has written one of the leading and like pioneering books on narcissism, Wendy Beharry. And I got very lucky to work with her at a very young age. And I realized um, that the way we get to heal starts from the inside every time, which puts you in the driver's seat. And I thought that was the most beautiful understanding. I thought it was the most empowering experience. And kind of from that moment forward, every time I was dabbling with what am I going to do with my career, I thought I was going to be a doctor. I thought I was going to be an actress. I thought I was going to be a performer. That was like the original game plan for me. And none of it ever shook out and feeling like what was truly aligned for me. And everything came back to that message, which is you get to steer your life the more you look inside yourself. And that's how I fell into it. I threw all my cards on the table and dove in. And then I ended up working a little bit in the social work aspect, working with incarceration rehabilitation, and then went to grad school, did the clinical route, and kind of popped out here on the other side and have been here ever since.
I love that you said that you start from the inside out. A lot of my content is built around the idea that it all starts with us internally. And I think a lot of people really struggle with getting to that place to begin with, because everything is external. It's all you did. This is your fault. You made this happen. I'm this way because of you. So, how can we begin to get people to see, or at least allow themselves to entertain the thought that it starts from the inside?
I think that is like the golden goose, and I couldn't agree with you more. The more we deny any culpability, any responsibility, the further we're putting off anything going our way. That is, we think, oh, if I take ownership of whatever's happening in my life, if I take some responsibility, I'm saying, oh, this is my fault. When in fact, it's the opposite. And one of the things I teach and preach from every single platform I operate clinically is if you spot it, you got it, which is one of my favorite things to understand. If you're in the world and you're going, this guy could get a load of this guy, there's something in you that scratches that's already a wound in you, whether that means it's a trait you have or it's a trait you've been wounded by. There's something already in there. And that's a really helpful thing to go, that's not my fault. The next thing I like to think about is like, how do people get there is radical self-ownership. The most evolved people in the world are going to take radical self-ownership because it always takes two to tango. And that doesn't mean you're responsible for all the shitty things people do to you, but perhaps there's a pattern of you picking shitty people. And every single time, from every single angle, you could go, what's my role? So I don't say this is happening to me, but I'm a part of this happening, which means I'm empowered to change it. And the last thing I like to remind people when it comes to that kind of mentality, which is like, how do I take radical self ownership? Which is, if nothing changes, nothing changes. It's pretty simple. And we often think, okay, the change is going to come from an external source. The change is going to come, it's going to helicopter in, it's going to strike me like lightning. And it usually doesn't work like that. It usually, life doesn't usually happen like that. So if you want to get in control of the distress in your life, the pain in your life, the relationship distress you're experiencing, whether that be your own mental health impacting your life or the people in your life impacting your mental health, realizing if nothing changes and the only thing you have control over is yourself. So instead of looking out, empowering the shift looks like getting into the driver's seat and saying, I'm not bad and I'm not responsible for what's been done to me. Nobody is, but I am responsible for changing it. And that's the kickoff.
Yeah, one of the most healing things you can hear, especially if it's from a family member, is it's not your fault.
Mm.
Or if you
Always.
can hear it from a third party, somebody that just acknowledges and recognizes the things that you went through, they can see it, they can feel it, they can sense it. They're listening, right? They're sitting with you and they're allowing you to express it. So now you're not in this denial of your reality. You're actually in the moment and allowing yourself to get there
Mm.
to that place and then to recognize that, yeah, it wasn't my fault. And with that
Yeah.
comes that radical acceptance again of the circumstances in which you grew up, in which you lived. It wasn't your fault, but they were the conditions that you were exposed to. That was your environment, and you had to grow up in that environment. Everybody had their own environment that they grew up in, and I think that we often forget that. I believe they call it Sonder, where everybody has a life equally as complicated as yours, this internal world and experience
Yeah.
that's happening all around them all at the same time and internally with their own hopes, dreams, goals, and desires. And we often forget that because we spend so much time trying to get the other person to see us, hear us, understand us, to love us, and to get something from that experience of the other person that we don't sit back and recognize that, oh, I have a inner world too, and my story is important. And that's the other part of what you dive into is the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves.
Absolutely. I think that is one of the I'm hoping is like the next buzzy thing in like pop psychology is like the understanding of narratives, right?
Yeah.
We
It's
kind
all
of
I talk
don't.
about.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that. We're
And
super
and
we're super blind.
but here's what's funny, I'm not a therapist, guys. I'm a
Yeah.
former cop that just had a lot of different life experiences in my 46 years, and it brought me to this realization of the importance of story and what
Yeah.
you tell yourself and how much that actually matters because it paints everything that you see in the world to include how you see yourself and your place in it. And we take all these other narratives that are external to us and we overlay them into our own story without ever questioning that we
And we
even
cherry
should
them.
pick. We
And we
cherry
cherry
pick.
and we
Yes.
go, "Oh, that one fits. So I'm gonna
Right.
keep that one. Oh, that one doesn't, but it's positive. Toss it." And we that's how we're subconsciously operating all the time
Yeah.
until we become radically aware that these are stories. They're not inherently facts. And not all thoughts are facts and not all feelings are facts. In fact, most of them are neither. And it's really important to really dive in and remember that. I couldn't agree with you more. The narratives and the stories we build about ourselves become the house in which we live. And you get to tear that shit down and rebuild it anytime you want. But it's going to require you looking around and saying, what's holding up this roof?
Now, the other thing that you said was if you spot it, you got it.
Mm.
I think it's important for people to understand it's not necessarily that you have it wholly and completely, but
Right.
you've experienced it on a level that it's been written on your nervous system. It is a part of your world. It's a part of your experience. So you had a narcissistic parent. It doesn't make you a narcissist, but you did suffer from narcissistic abuse. I think getting to that knowledge and that understanding of self, especially when you lived in that environment, you don't really have a self. You're just an extension of that parent or both caregivers. You're just an extension of them and their world and their hopes and their dreams and their goals. You never really got to foster your own throughout your childhood. So you missed out on a childhood and you missed out on building yourself. And now
Yeah,
you're this adult that feels kind of incomplete with who you are and how you're showing up, and your relationships don't work out all that well and you're trying to figure it out. Then you finally get to this place where you're on the internet and you find out about narcissism and what that is. And you're like, I only date avoidance and I only date narcissists. And it's careful on that. I see that you're picking it out and you're seeing certain experiences that are familiar and you don't like that, but that doesn't mean that those people then have what you're just trying to make sense of the world,
absolutely.
and your relationships at that point.
I think that's a really interesting and important distinction to make. And I love that we're able to clarify that. Spot it, you got it doesn't mean if you see the trait in somebody else, it means you inherently have it. What it does mean is I am so familiar with this that I have a built in reaction to whatever is happening. When that, it's not, oh, this person who the stranger hit a button, that means nothing. It's like, it means there's a button. It means there's already been a button installed, which means there's history here. And I think you said something really interesting, which is often people don't have a full self that they got to develop when they are born into environments that have such an enormous amount of distress because they're in survival. And then when you're in survival, all you do really, all you're able to do because you're just surviving is pattern adopt. So if you have a narcissistic parent who's always hooting and hollering in line or getting really short-tempered or is really condescending or has a hard time actually listening to anything you're saying, it's just automatic reactions.
Or it's
It's
always
quite likely
punishing you. Yeah.
or always punishing you. The likelihood that you're going to have either an adoption, a natural adoption of some of the behaviors, or you're gonna, because of the impact of the behaviors, have a natural adoption to the response of whatever that is. So anybody in the world who mimics or mirrors those things in that parent, you're gonna have an automatic response that looks like, "Stay so far, get so small, blame myself," because that's how you had to survive. You couldn't blame the person feeding you or keeping a roof over your head. You had to keep your attachment security, so you had to blame yourself, and that can expand in the world. So understanding how that is expanding in the way you spot stuff in the world and how you then relate to what you're spotting can be the gateway to releasing yourself for culpability and responsibility that's not yours to carry in the first place.
Yeah, it's that carried shame that we don't understand that it's not our burden to bear and it never was, but you always have it with you. It's always lingering. It's always there in the background and you don't know where it came from or what it was or how it got there or even how to release it. And it's only when you finally get to that place where you can finally breathe, like you're out of that environment, you've been out for a while, maybe life is good, you've got a job and things are going well, and then things start popping off for you. As soon as they get going good, that's when all the stuff, the other bricks start
Oh,
falling. You're like, oh no, now I have to deal with all this stuff.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And often, sometimes the good things we choose are in response to the trauma of our environment. And then you go, "Wait a minute, did I choose this because this is what I want? Or is this another response to my environment?" And it makes so much sense. When things get slow, you have to face yourself. When things get good, you have to look at what's actually happening around you because you're not just in fight or flight. Or you finally feel a sense of internal safety and security to be able to open your eyes after keeping them closed and hiding and look around and see what's actually alive.
Yeah, you said something really good there. Is this what I want?
Yeah.
I think so many people struggle with that. And so I get people that they want to come on for coaching or they want to have some sort of interaction via social media, and they're always looking for permission for something. They already know the answer, they already know the problem, they already know the circumstance. It'll be, and it's pages long and it's on all the platforms, and it's just, I appreciate you guys. I can't go through all of those, but I understand where it's coming from. And it always starts with they just want me to give them permission to do whatever it is that they already know that they have to do.
Yeah. And I think that is we're circling the most beautiful point, which is we often already have the answers. They're usually right alive within us, right beneath the surface of our skin. And so much trauma and so much distress that people live with is in this inability to fully trust themselves, right? That's a really distilled down answer to like how does trauma manifest in fully functioning adults is the inability to fully trust either your reality, your feelings, or the validity of either your reality or your feelings. So even if you're like, I believe that this is happening and I believe that this is my feeling, but should I? Am I allowed to? Is that okay? Is that an appropriate response to whatever is happening? And that for me is an indication almost often of a lot of early childhood trauma and relational distress and attachment wounds and really weighted narratives that are, like you said, rooted in shame.
Yeah, it's so interesting because there was a time where I'm at work and people are saying no to certain things. And it's, wait a minute, your boss literally just told you to go do this and you're saying no?
Yeah.
Wait, you can do that? Oh, guess what? Then the answer's no, right?
Oh,
And
wait a minute. I can have opinions that and answers and responses that don't look like just benefiting the other person.
yeah,
Fascinating.
I don't
Yeah,
have
and
to
that and that
abandon
will make me
myself. I
mad.
don't have to give up. I actually have a choice in the
Yeah,
matter.
yeah.
Interesting.
Super interesting how that all
It,
plays out.
it becomes this huge wake up call internally because now you're tapping into your NO, but you're
Mm.
also tapping into your no, your KNOW, which is ultimately your discernment. And you're allowing yourself to look at people, places, environments, and situations a little bit differently from like a third party perspective. And is this good for me? Is this helpful? Is this unhelpful? Should I do this? And now you're like, wait, I have wants and desires too. What is this? And you've been living
Yeah.
your life in this state of fight or flight, never knowing that you actually had all of this inside of you. And now it's starting to come out, and sometimes not at a snail's pace, which can be overwhelming.
It's so true. I think understanding what shame is the primary way to get your nervous system to stop believing it's you. What is even understanding what shame is, by definition, is one of the most eye-opening things to people in the world. Because shame is the belief you fundamentally are, not you feel, not you behave, not I think sometimes, or I think often. It is I am, the belief that you have an unwanted identity that is unchangeable. Right? So I am bad. I am broken. I am defective. I am dumb. I am unlovable, right? Whatever those primary shame beliefs are, it's that this is unchangeable. This is a fixed quality, and it's one I don't want to have, which means I'm going to build an entire internal ecosystem off of making sure I never have to touch this. Nobody else gets to touch this. Or maybe it's the opposite, which is like, all I am is this, and I'm going to put this out in the world so everybody else can see it, which means they can't hurt me first, right? We're building an entire often when our shame is in the driver's seat of our lives, we're building an entire personality, an entire set of choices, an entire way of emotionally relating to others based on this shame belief, right? I've watched so many people who have this primary internalized belief that they're not enough become these overachieving, high performers, never stop, never slow down, highly unreceptive to feedback people, right? Where they're like, it's go or go, it's go or go nowhere. It's go all the time or I drown and die. And that comes from the belief that if they're not constantly disproving this narrative, this shame method, that it becomes true. And once people internalize that's what's happening, the shame messages in the driver's seat of your life, you think it's who you are, right? And once we start dismantling that this is not a quality of your identity, this is just an experience you had as a kid that you bought into as a true story, a true narrative. And the moment we get to put this down, we get to look at who you actually are, which is none of these shame beliefs in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's a really hard place to get to. And I would also put it on a spectrum because I was actually watching a Kerwin Ray video yesterday and he's talking about getting up in public speaking, right? And diving into how we make ourselves small, which is going to be rooted in a certain amount of shame. Like, I can't show myself. I can't be my full self. I can't be authentic. I can't share my opinions and be who I really am. Because if I do, that means the whole world and the people in my environment, they're going to actually be able to see me and know that I have thoughts and feelings and opinions and
And they're
goals
going
and
to see
dreams
me
and
and realize
desires.
I'm
Yeah. And it
Yeah.
comes down to that, and so then you make yourself incredibly small, and you never fully become who you're capable of becoming. That just piles on the shame for the rest of your life until you finally put yourself in that position where you allow yourself to become more authentic and break through that barrier, that self-imposed mental prison that you've put yourself into, that I can't show who I really am because I'll be abandoned, I'll be rejected.
Absolutely. I think that's so true. And I think there are so many people who are shrinking themselves, just like you said, becoming so small because that's the only option they've ever had. It is the hardest thing a person can do. Open that box of their own shame and suffering that they've buried below the floorboards because it is the most terrifying thing in the world to confront because you're really scared of what you're gonna find when you open that box that you built an entire house of avoidance or a house of panic on. And it's a really important, it's like the gateway to really being healed and embodied and aligned and safe is being willing to open that shame box and say, "Okay, what's in here?" And start to buy in that maybe it's not even your box. Maybe
Now
it's
this
the thing and put it under the floor.
Yeah, this is a really good place to, if you have an exercise for us, to provide an exercise of something that people can do if they're just now starting to enter into that place of this is resonating with them. They're like, yeah, I've got some shame. I've got some things that I've been going through and I've been trying to fight away, but I'm always in this place of fight or flight or what it feels like. I'm always just trying to survive. And
Yeah.
how can I bring myself back down from that heightened state of arousal? What is something that I can do?
That's a beautiful question, and I think there's something really simple that people can start doing, which is changing the "I am" message, confronting the "I am" message, right? So, when people go, "Ooh, maybe there's something here," I want people to slow down and take a deep breath, and I want them to think, "I'm going to hold this in 2 separate hands. What is the story telling me I am versus what do I know I need to believe that is true?" Right? So 2 separate hands, you gotta pull apart the shame message. What is this shame message? 1, what is it? I'm stupid, I'm unlovable, I'm defective, I'm a failure,
All
I'm
of the above.
whatever, and it could be all of the above. It could just be like, but what in that moment, contacting the message, right? So if it's a friend or a partner or a family member is mad at you, or they're always like, look at this guy. Oh, Molly, oh, Mark, oh, Josh, classic them, right? The message then becomes, oh, I'm bad. I'm unlovable, right? The shame message is I am. Then you go to the I am message. So identify the message. What is it? I am X. And then you have to hold it in 2 separate hands. The message is here. You pull it apart, 2 hands. Visualize folding it. The message is I'm not enough. What's the truth? What's the truth? This made me feel bad. I'm feeling, what are you feeling? Identify the feeling. This made me feel rejected. This made me feel inferior. This made me feel sadness. This made me feel anxiety. And we do that because we then need to replace the shame, the I am message. Oh, I feel embarrassed, but I am worthy, lovable, enough, capable, anything, even if you don't believe it, which you probably won't if the primary shame message is blaring in your face, but you replace it with what could be true if that isn't real, right? If it's I feel embarrassed, rejected, neglected, not enough, but I am worthy, capable, brave, lovable, right? You start to reprocess your neural network to not buy in to the story. It becomes feelings. And if they're feelings, we get to take care of them. They don't need to get buried beneath the floorboard. We got to hold them gently. And then it gives you an opportunity to rewrite the story and then practice self care. So I'll repeat it just from top to bottom, which is identify the I am message. What is it saying? I am broken, defective, unlovable, unworthy. You name it, whatever it is. And then you pull it apart, right? and say, if this is not true, if I pull this apart and look inside of it and hold it in two separate hands, what does it feel like? What is this experience? If it's not an I am, make me feel I feel X. I feel sad. I feel scared. I feel lonely. I feel unlovable. I feel abandoned, right? Just because they are being distant or avoidant of you doesn't mean you're rejectable. It means you feel unloved. I feel scared. I feel this. And then you go, but I am worthy enough, whole, capable. Replace it. And you practice it every time. And my guess is the
But
same
that's so
two.
hard.
Yeah, it is. But if it changes, nothing changes. And that's the thing
Right.
I said at the beginning. So it's all hard. All of it's hard. It's never
Yeah,
not
but
gonna be, but choose your
and
heart.
whatever you're not changing,
You're choosing.
choosing. Yeah.
You're
And
choosing.
as cliche as that sounds, like, we hate that, but it's very true, and I love that you acknowledge that, you know, if you can shift it from "I am" statements to "I feel," now you're identifying your thoughts and your patterns and your core beliefs, and you're recognizing that a lot of these things are just temporary moments in time, and it allows you this is what I tell people, you acknowledge, you assess, you process, you integrate, and you release, and so we get to this place ultimately where you take that breath and you take that double inhale in through that nose, that physiological sigh, and you let it out, and you do that for 3 to 5 minutes, and all of a sudden, your physiological process begins to change, your shoulders drop, your blood pressure goes down, and you begin to recognize that, yeah, I was activated in this moment, and that's fine, but I have this tool that I'm using with the breath, and then I'm acknowledging and using my brain now and rewriting my nervous system by changing the words that I'm using with myself, and I've developed a system, so now I feel more competent, capable, and confident in who I am and what I'm doing, and I can show up in the world just a little bit differently because I took the time to do those things. And like you said, yeah, it is hard, but life
It's
isn't
awful.
easy and it's not
So
supposed to be.
awful. Doing
Yeah.
brand new scary things, it's like jumping off a cliff without knowing if you got a bungee cord, right? Because you've never done it. You
And
don't know
nobody
what
ever
the
showed you.
no one ever showed you, and it's not your fault that you don't know. It's and that's the thing you're saying is people are like, "Well, must be because me not knowing must be a fallibility of mine. It must be a character defect that I don't know how to do this." And the reality is almost none of us know how to do that, which is when we talk about the future of mental health. I'm like, "Oh god, like we all know how to we got taught how to change a tire and we got taught how to scrub a bathtub and we get taught how to do all these things, but we're not taught how to self-regulate or identify our feelings or any of that, and that's gotta change. But until then, until society and parenting and our social networks help us build that, it's gonna be our job to say, "Okay, this is a skill set I need to learn. It's not my fault I don't have it, but I'm gonna have to do some scary shit to come to it and have it sit in my pocket." And that's the work.
Yeah. I feel like for probably the past 50 years or more, it's basically been put your head down, do as you're told, be a good little boy or girl, don't deviate from that, and we're not going to have any problems.
And
And
don't feel about it either.
yeah, yes,
Yeah,
and don't feel about it. Exactly.
yeah.
Now, you're
Uh,
also sorry, did you have something?
no, I was gonna say that's just exactly right. That's exactly it, just put your head down. That teaches you how to not feel.
Now, to shift gears, you also specialize in trauma and grief. And so we're giving you guys a whole bunch of stuff here on this podcast to go through, and we're taking through a journey of self discovery and what that looks like. But these are two deeply complex human experiences. What are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about healing from trauma and loss as it relates to grief?
Oh, that's my favorite question. I love that question. What is like, the greatest misconception about it? That it's going to look like anything you've ever seen before. People are like, "Okay, Google the stages of grief. What
Yes.
are they? Let me see what the 7 stages of grief are going to show me." And then when your internal experience delineates, right, and has its whole own network, you go, "Oh, I'm failing at grief. I'm doing this wrong." The biggest misconception there is, in my opinion, about grief and grieving is that there is a way to do it. There are patterns, right, of course, that we can trace with anything, but it's a really messy, non-linear road. And trying to measure your own against somebody else's is almost always gonna leave you feeling a bit crazy.
Yeah.
Grief is crazy making. So I would say that. And my second is that the stuff we tell ourselves that we can and cannot grieve about is usually wrong. And we often, if we allowed ourselves to really sit with what we are feeling, we're going to find that grief lives very closely to things that we might never even notice. And grief's kind of in a lot of experiences that we deny ourselves of having.
How can we identify that it's grief to begin with that we're feeling?
That's a great question too.
Because it's always underlying. It's showing up. It's like bubbling under the surface, and it comes up as all of these other things first. And
Yes.
it takes a while to get to grief.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've talked about this, but anger as a secondary emotion is a thing I try to really help people to identify because I too think it's a really helpful practice for identifying grief emotions. Anger is a secondary emotion, as many people who are looking into mental health know, as clinicians know. And what that means is you've got to have another feeling first in order to get to anger. So usually it's sadness, fear, shame, anxiety, disappointment, pain. Usually it's pain of some kind, sadness that we feel is or unable to express, or it is so heavy or hard to hold that we use anger as our form of expression of that experience. And often, once we start identifying anger in ourselves, we're able to start identifying the other emotions. So usually that's an expression, behavior, reaction that does not feel aligned with our internal experience or who we are. It doesn't feel aligned with who we are. It feels dissonant. It feels, for example, if you're really patient, loving, you adore your kids, you adore your spouse, or you adore your friend, and you are noticing your fuse is this big and you're having these enormous reactions, or you're feeling combative, or even you're feeling really deflated or really disengaged, which is also could be a sign of anger. Being able to start spotting that, going, what is that? And the same way we do that with anger, we can do that with grief. And grief is usually and almost always about loss of anything. It doesn't need to be life. It doesn't need to be a relationship. It can be dreams. It can be about a fantasy that we had that got poofed away. It can be
Oh,
about
those expectations will get you.
expectations. It's
Yeah.
always the expectations that'll get you, right? And that
This is
means we
this is how it's supposed to be.
this is how it's supposed to be. And when we have to grapple with the fact that it's not that way,
Yeah.
there's often no playground for those emotions or dance floor or conversation network. We're not really allowed to have it. So then it sits beneath the surface and mingles with the rest of our feelings and it comes out in an expression. Grief is often expressed in ways that don't feel aligned, just like anger. And so the stronger and more capable you get at identifying, like, ooh, I'm mad right now, or ooh, I'm angry right now, you're going to get that same skill set built around, ooh, this might be grief. Because I also feel like grief can be a primary emotion, but it's expressed like a secondary emotion.
Yeah. And it all goes back to what we started on, which is story.
Story.
Yeah.
It does. It's crazy how it all circles back.
No, and it does. And it took me years of going through my own stuff to get to the place where it's like, oh, I tell myself a story about things and stuff in life and the world and my place in it. And so that's how
Mhm.
I've developed my content to produce it that way so that people begin to understand, like, oh, I could actually start asking myself questions when I start to feel some of this stuff and try to pinpoint where this is actually coming from. You begin to realize that your values or your standards or your boundaries have been crossed. And so there's a little bit of righteous anger in there. And
Yes.
it's okay to have that because there's a moral standpoint that has impacted you at this point. But then you have to go just a little bit deeper underneath the surface to get to that next place.
Spot on. Going deeper beneath the surface is the way through all of it. And we have to get comfortable putting our goggles on and go swimming in the deep end. And who would if you've never jumped in the pool?
Who wants to actually look at themselves and then take ownership and responsibility and accountability for the way that our life pans out? It's just much easier and a little bit of laziness to just be like, "Psh, everybody
Well,
else's fault.
I'm going to push back on that. I actually disagree. I actually don't think it's easier. I think that's a story. I think that's a story we've all bought into. I do. I don't think it's easier at all to close your eyes and point out. I actually think that we tell ourselves that it's an easier thing to do. I think we are so unpracticed at looking inward. And just in the same way when people say, "Oh, I'm a bad runner. I don't run. It's so much easier to walk slow." In some ways, our bodies were built for that. Now, and I don't say all people all the time and everywhere, you don't run 40 miles a day and you're going to start hurting yourself. The same way if you sit so deep inside the trenches of your just distress and get to know it all the time and only look inward, you could get hurt. But you need to be able to have contact with reality that's external to yourself. But I think we tell ourselves a very interesting story in this modern era that it's harder to look inside than it is to just point blame and keep pushing. Because I think the repercussions of that are
Yeah.
so much larger. And what we then carry because of it is so much heavier than ever taking responsibility and learning how to process and feel is.
It's what keeps you stuck, right? Again, it goes back to story because it's easier to just tell that story and do exactly what I've been doing. Just keep doing what you're doing. And you'll do that till 85 years old. And then you'll be 85 looking back going, oh, man, I wish I had done some things differently.
Yeah.
And
I can't, I won't, I don't.
yeah,
Right? That those are I can't, I won't, I don't. When it comes, why don't you feel that way?
yeah.
Or why didn't you work through that? Or why don't we talk about that? I can, I won't, or I don't. And those things keep you really stuck. Or they can't, they won't, they don't. So I'm not going to engage with them about that. That those messages keep us paralyzed. They keep us cemented to the thing that we're trying to break free from.
Yeah, and I think if anybody's looking to get anything out of this podcast, it is to allow yourself just for a moment to think about allowing yourself to be more authentically you, who you are, and show up in the world as that version of yourself so that you can begin to understand and tap into those feelings in the future of actually being more of who you are, who you're capable of becoming, to release yourself from that mental prison. Because that's exactly what we're talking about here is this prison that's been made by your thoughts, feelings, emotions, and core beliefs that we've been stuck in and that we stay in. Because to identify and begin to work through some of this stuff, it becomes this mountain that is so impossible, right? The mountain is you. And
The mountain is you.
yeah,
Love it. Said.
that's Brianna Wiest. I can't take that. But
Okay. We'll say,
that's
we're using it.
yeah, that's the name of her book, which if you haven't read the book, guys, that's a
Yeah.
really good one to dig into.
Amazing.
Now, I do
Love
want to touch on addiction and recovery for a little
Yeah.
bit since you did post-incarceration rehabilitation, and I'm sure those all combine with one another. What are some of the most common emotional and psychological roadblocks people face when they're trying to rebuild their lives from that perspective of addiction recovery?
I think the roadblocks are actually, and I try to remind people of this, not dissimilar from any other roadblock. It just is the story we build around the roadblock itself. So, what are the most common? I think the most common is people saying, "This is my most valuable tool. And without it, I can't survive." Whether that be this often substance abuse, substance use disorders, even behavior disorders that we lean towards anger that results in deviant behavior that then results in incarceration or all sorts of repercussion. It's rooted in not having access to your toolbox or believing you have a toolbox at all. So the roadblock people run into is saying, "Yeah, of course I'd love to not be doing X, Y, or Z or using this. But the amount of distress I'm in is too big and I don't have any other tool to use it. I have no other tool to utilize healing. I have no tool to sit with this discomfort. There's no way out but this." And so I think the biggest roadblock is going to believe or changing the belief that this is a tool at all. Right? I think the biggest roadblock is believing that or changing the belief that the substances, the behaviors, the patterns that allow you to escape your distress is actually harming you, not helping you. It actually maybe was never a tool at all. You thought it was an escape hatch, but it was actually just a trapdoor that locked you inside pain for longer. And I think shifting that, really believing it's buy-in. The toughest roadblock is having buy-in that the thing you're doing is actually an escape hatch or a tool at all. It actually is self-destruction. It's actually a trap door. It's actually shackles. It's actually a weapon that you use against yourself. And you have to really believe, I think, that this is not the magic you thought it was, and get real honest about what it costs you more than what it gives you.
That's good.
Yeah.
So then how do you feel about once an addict, always an addict?
How do I feel about that?
It's a common statement that
It's
gets
a
made.
common statement. It is. People love I think
I find it extremely unhelpful.
I find it extremely unhelpful too. I'm like, "But what do I think about it?" I think there's something to be said about people who have brains. We've seen the brain scans, right? They're all over. If you wanna look it up, you can see what addiction does to a brain. It literally changes the composition of your brain and the way you receive dopamine, perceive your pleasure centers of your brain change, how you perceive and receive information changes. All those things are true. So, do I believe that addiction change? It's in you. It lives in you. Yes and no. I think certain brains are wired for certain things, but I don't believe once anything, always anything about anything, including this, about any single aspect of your identity or behavior, including addiction. I think belief makes things real in a way that we need to understand is not just a woo happy, sweet thing to hear. It's not just a phrase, but it's a reality, which is your thoughts and your feelings and your beliefs are the house in which you live. So if you say, "This is not who I am, this is a part of my experience," you're not even an addict anymore. You're a person who's abusing substances and knows that it doesn't work for you anymore. Now, sometimes I think within the addiction community, people really find camaraderie and support by being have it with a label that they can live inside of. Say, "This is who I am," and I'm gonna find other people who get it because I feel othered and I don't feel seen, and I don't feel like I'm welcome in the like, with the normies. And so I think it is sometimes a label that people slap on themselves to feel like they have a tribe, and I love that there's community and camaraderie, like misfit culture. People being like, "I'm a misfit, and or I'm gonna hang with the other misfits because that's the place I belong, and I don't belong with everybody else." Because that's really all we're seeking is a sense of belonging at the end of the day. So I think that once an addict's always an addict, no. I think that it's about a label and identity that I don't think is helpful in many ways, but I also wanna be careful and say because I don't wanna be like, "It doesn't work for anybody calling yourself an addict," and if you it's a pigeonhole, because I also think being able to identify with a part of you or a behavior or a piece that feels so harmful can be empowering, and you can find community in it too, but no is my very that was my very long answer to no. I
So
don't.
I think I can bring this together though. It's a tool and a story that is helpful for a period of time and season in your life. So
Absolutely.
so if you're just starting the process, right? You're diving into it and you're like, "Hey, you're like me. We should be in this community. We should
Yeah.
be able to interact with each other
And
and
you
just."
see you see
Yeah,
me get a thing that I thought was ungettable.
right.
So different, so othered. Yeah.
And I always liken this to the people that are the anxious attachers and the ones that are obsessed with narcissism. They get into these online communities on social media, and you'll see them. It's 200,000 people deep,
Wow.
400,000 people deep, and just nothing but comments. And they've been in there for years. You have to get to this place where you begin to look at that and say, you know what? this started out as something a little bit more pure. I was confused. I was frustrated. I was hurt. I had mixed emotions. I had all this stuff that was going on inside of me and I didn't understand it. And this provided me a pathway to begin to
Yeah.
understand what all of this is, but then also understand myself a little bit in that process. But then you get obsessed with it. It becomes like this habit, habitual thing that you do over and over again. And then it just becomes who you are. So now you've shifted into this other place that you never intended to be with to begin with. But again, you felt seen, you felt heard, you felt like you were part of a community. And that's really hard to let go, especially if you don't have a good support system out in the real world, which is always that first line of defense. I always remind people, please make real friends. Novelty is king. Go get into groups, church group, I don't care what
Oh
it
my gosh.
is, or run
Totally.
club, like
Find people, find
something.
community.
Yeah, real
Totally.
people.
Totally. I think that's so important what you just named about the community aspect of distress, including I like the likening you did with certain attachment distress to addiction, because I think there's some real overlap here.
Yeah.
And I also think it's really interesting because when people go into those communities, they're desperate, whether that be go into addiction support groups, whether it's you're getting sober, you're going to AA, or you're going to Al-Anon, or you're going to I'm recovering from being with a narcissist support group online. You're desperate for someone to say, I see you and you're not insane.
Yeah.
Yes, that's not in your head. Yes, that's real. Yes, that's my experience too. Now, once you get that can be really addicting, right? It's in lieu of what we talked about earlier, which is having a sense of self-trust. I believe myself. I believe my experience, right? And without it, without actually developing that internal belief system of, oh yeah, that is real. Oh yeah, that was harmful. Oh yeah, that doesn't work for me. Oh, whatever it may be, of really buying into what you need to do for yourself, using the other and that community in lieu of having your own voice helping support you is always going to be dangerous. So that I think is really true. And also it being a tool to numb out from having to sit with your own feelings and sit with your own experience is a really high risk. In the same way you do scroll on social media. It's a nervous system regulator, right? And so the automatic, I'm gonna jump in and into those groups, into those ecosystems can sometimes be a way you avoid sitting with yourself and really learning how to retrain your mind and lean into you as much as you lean into others.
So to keep this on relationships, I made a video on no contact before we hopped on. And one of the
Oh, that's push
questions
that button.
No, I know, and because people wanna break no contact, and
Yes.
they wanna break no contact because they didn't want it to begin with, right? This is the object of their desire. I have to be with you. You're the person that meets my needs, or at least I pretend that you do, and I need to be with you because without you, I am nothing, and I have to have that. And so somebody asked the question, what if they owe you a lot of money
Uh,
and it's already been 7 months?
Love that.
How would you help somebody work through
How
that?
would I help somebody? I'd say you can wait another 6 weeks.
Yeah.
You can wait another 6 weeks for your money.
I would say
I
that
think
sounds from a police officer standpoint, former police officer, that's a
yeah,
civil dispute, and you should probably,
yeah, that sounds like a legal issue actually.
get a
Um,
report filed, and you'll be good to go.
yeah, you're like, I don't know about that." I think no contact is such an important microcosm for something else altogether, which is love is not attachment. And often people are like, I cannot let go of what I love. And I can't, like, if I lose this love, I will die. This is my life source. This is the nourishment I have to keep going. And that's often what we tell ourselves or what people tell themselves when they have to go no contact, whether it be with their a parent or a sibling or a friend or a partner. And that is what programs us to say, "Oh my god, I can't do that because love is what keeps us alive." But if it feels like you're going to die without this thing, it's usually not because it's love. It's usually because it's attachment or even limerence. It might not even be a full attachment. It might just be the adrenaline-soaked feeling experience you then have and become obsessed with the idea of another. And breaking the attachment you have to somebody and be if it's real love, if it's real love and this person is a loving being to you who contributes to the love you have in your life and with yourself, and vice versa, you taking some time and space away from them, in my professional clinical opinion, can only reveal what is true, which is it's real love or it's just attachment. And giving yourself the safety, security, and space to really be able to identify for yourself what is a thing that often only distance can give you.
But I can't do space. I can't do distance. That's scary. That doesn't feel
Yeah.
good.
Sometimes what's scary means you gotta go in. Sometimes
Yeah.
but yes, of course. Yeah. No contact is so scary. And I think I offer people, what if every time you wanted to reach out to them, you reached into you? What would that look like? Because they're scratching an itch for you in there. They're comforting some piece of you that you're desperately trying to get comforted, or a need being met for something in you. You know, what would happen if you reached in there and you did it for you? Would you still want them? Would that still feel safe? Would that still be love?
Yeah.
Sometimes even thinking about it, even just going, what is it? Or what am I trying to get met? Or could I? Or what's that even about? Could make you go, oh, maybe I don't feel that like magnetic thing in the same way I did 7 seconds ago.
So since we've been talking about relationships, what is, and this is so popular, and if you've seen my social media, I do a ton of humorous memes on
I know. I
anxious
know.
anxious and the avoidant as a way of just providing some insight that, like you just said, it's really hard for us to even entertain or to look at. That if I dive in or delve into self-soothing, then that means that I have to take care of myself and my own needs, wants, and desires, and feelings, and thoughts, and emotions, and that's too overpowering. So what do I do? So what's your take on the anxious and the avoidant dynamic?
Wow, there's so much to unpack there. I think
Your
what do I
best
think?
5 minutes.
My best 5 minutes. What's my best 5 minutes? My best 5 minutes is, I think the anxious and avoidant dynamic is like a real comfy, cozy way to distill down something that's much more complicated. And we're putting people in buckets that I don't think they need to live inside of. I think it's a helpful label. I think it's a helpful identifier to notice what's happening in you. I don't think things are as cut and dry as just I'm anxious and they're avoidant, or I'm avoidant and they're anxious.
We
I
just became best friends. This is great.
oh, did
Yay. If
God,
if you dive into the captions on my content, this is exactly it, guys, and if you're not
oh, man, I'm
making
so
this a
glad.
part of you, you need to.
We're building bunk beds. We're building
Yeah.
bunk beds in the Facebook.
We are, man. It
We
goes
are.
so much deeper, like you're saying.
It is. It's so much deeper. And I often, a thing I love to really point out is, if you are anxious in every single space of your life, this has nothing to do with the avoidant partner. If you're an avoidant and you avoid emotional distress, intimacy, connection, healing, vulnerability in every space of your life, this is not about the partner. This is about your own trauma responses. We don't even need to be looking at them. Now, if you notice, ooh, I was a really stable, secure, healthy being before I had this relationship, and now I'm swinging one way or the other. Again, yes, that's something about your attachment distress, sure, but it's about the relationship dynamic, right? There's something about this that is not safe and healthy for your nervous system in its totality. That doesn't mean it's inherently all bad, right? Not everything's all bad, and doesn't mean bad people, or it doesn't mean they're bad people, and it doesn't mean it's not for you, but it also doesn't mean it is. And we want to make these, we would like to, of course, people would like to vilify the people in their lives who are causing them pain and distress, but it's creating simple solutions to complex problems and complex people. And I think that can get us in real trouble. So, what do I think about the anxious and avoidant thing? I think it's real. I think there's some real psychological and scientific realities to the fact that we try to heal the wound in us by choosing somebody that's a reflection of it. I think that's an inherent reality. But I don't think that's just with anxiousness and avoidance and attachment wounds. I think if you have a narcissistic parent who doesn't, or a harmful parent, or a disengaged parent, you will often try to replicate whatever wound that caused in you in the romantic partner you chose, to prove to yourself that those things aren't true and they're not about you. You had a mom who abandoned you or didn't show you the love you needed, or a dad who abandoned you and didn't show the love you needed, choosing somebody who already doesn't really show you the love you need and say, if I can convince them to love me the way that feels safe, then I get to heal this wound that is the deepest in me. Then I get to prove my lovability. I get to disprove my shame message. I get to heal my attachment. I'm saved, right? And we subconsciously replicate these things. I think that expands far past attachment. I think those are pretty hats and pretty bows we can put on some little much larger complex dynamic. They can be helpful, especially in my opinion, when it comes to avoidant distress. I think having a label for what that is more beneficial to the self and to the person who's trying to do work than some of the other tangos. Because that's really often people who avoid understanding themselves or making contact with themselves. It's because all of it feels too much and too impossible to touch. And having an understanding of what's happening to you and being able to dive into that can be the lifeboat, that the buoy that you need to grab onto that can help you start doing your work. But complex problem, simple answer usually never
It's
is the
never
per
yeah, it's not enough. If we can look at, "Oh, it's my type." Yeah, your type, and guess what? It's familiar. Yeah,
Yeah,
it feels like home. Okay. How is
yeah.
home?
Yeah, how was home? Was it on fire?
And I insert that phrase in so many of my videos are like 5 minutes long. But I tend to insert that particular phrase, and it hits every time. You'll see it in the comments section where
Yeah,
people
people it's
they're
so
like,
real.
"Oh." They're like, I
Yeah,
don't like that," because now you
yeah,
have to reflect on what was home like and what were the circumstances and situations and problems. And then, "Oh, I'm dating this person and they're not really all that great, but they're the best things in sliced bread that I know of because of your attachment." It's not because you might have a love for them as a person, as a human, right? But it's more attachment than it is that love. And so you feel this overwhelming connection that you have to have. You got to get them.
so
Uh,
true.
Somebody wrote the book, you got to get the guy. You don't have to get anything. You have to be more of you. And when you're more of you, you'll unlock this whole new level to the game and you'll gain
Yeah,
access to different types of people that are now going to resonate at that frequency that you are.
absolutely. So well said, and I think that's so important to be like the buzz reminder. It's similar to mine, which is I am the anti cool girl culture captain. I think it's so silly, and I'm like this whole like nonchalant pretend you don't care, assimilate and be a chameleon to the person you want to be. I think is a
Yeah.
gateway drug to getting your heart broken. I think it's a gateway drug to creating more trauma. I think it's a gateway drug to causing your own attachment distress. I think the fastest and best way for you to get what you want, other than becoming what you seek in someone else, is to be all of you and be it proudly and be it boldly. Be, as I like to say, the most chalant version of yourself. Be a person who cares, be a person who's passionate about all the things you're passionate about, be a person who feels all the things that are authentically your feelings, and it will allow for people to see you for who you are and choose you for your fullness. Now, that's going to require you being or practicing learning how to be okay with people seeing you and saying, not for me. And you
Oh,
not crumbling. That's the reason why we hide ourselves. So we don't have to feel rejected for what we're being witnessed as, but it also prevents people from seeing your fullness and accepting you for who you are.
they're very keen to label everybody and everything everywhere
Mm,
all the time because they're trying to make sense again of their world and their place in it. And you're an avoidant and you're this. And since you're an avoidant, I just sent you the book Attached Priority Mail saying you need to read it because you need to fix yourself because you're the one that's broken. And it's just hold up, homie, slide
yeah.
back, step back for a second, take a breath, like focus on you. What does your anxious attachment actually tell you about you? And
Yeah.
what can you glean from that information? And then how do you show up and integrate yourself into relationship? And we can just go down this whole rabbit hole just on you, the individual. But again, it's easy, right? It's easier to just take the book and say, you're the one that needs to fix yourself. I'm good.
Yeah.
Because I feel more feelings than you do. Is you
I think that there's again, it's like a complex problem that we're trying to keep real simple, which will never work, will not get all the answers. So I have an enormous amount of as an anxious human being in general, I have so much compassion for a person who's anxious or in distress, trying to find a way to not be anxious and in distress, right? That's your tool, which is to try to solve by doing. We have to understand that the avoidant is trying the avoidant, air quotes, right? I think that's a silly way to frame it, but someone who uses avoidance as their main tool, they're trying to do the same thing, regulate themselves, right? So, yeah, I think there's some validity to being like, I need to label this. I need to label this to understand it. So, fair, helpful until it's not, right? Because
Yeah.
again, it's something we talked about, which is externalizing, 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 externalizing. At some point, you got to look inward. No, you don't have to say, I don't hold them responsible, because it's quite possible that someone else is responsible for their behavior and the harm they're causing. But that doesn't mean it's in a lieu instead of you looking inside. Two things can be true. You can send them the book. And then you know what you got to do? You got to put your phone down and you got to go for a walk and journal about what you're feeling. It can be both.
Yeah.
It can be I don't
Got
think you need to a walk can change so much. Breath
It
work,
does.
like you said, regulating your nervous system can change so much. Journaling can change so much. Dancing it out can change so much. Instead of just responding, whether that be shut down to respond or overreach to respond, what would it be like to slow down and be with yourself first?
I tend to interview people who are more disruptors in the space of mental health, and they're looking at things just a little bit differently than it's traditionally been done. They're looking at the DSM-5 and asking themselves, is this helpful? Is this unhelpful? And of course, they're leaning more towards it being unhelpful in a lot of different ways because of the way that it's being used. So I'm curious what your thoughts and feelings are on the future of therapy, on healing, and of course, what's been more popularized, self-healing.
I think that I'm in the same camp as many of your disruptors, which is pathology is only so helpful.
Yeah.
We can pathology, diagnosing something, labeling something is only so helpful if we're not going to look at the cause, if we're not going to tend to the why. I think the future of mental health, I think we're on the frontier of what's going to be a radical new era of people realizing that this is actually in their control. The same way that people's biohacking in the industry that has become so expansive around health and your biological age versus your real age and all these nuances. I think we're going to start realizing that the power is right here. The power lives within us. And I think mental health language is going to start being incorporated more in our culture and our society. My deepest hope is that people start getting a whole lot comfier talking about what's actually happening inside of them instead of avoiding it, evading it, just like we talked about our parents' era being like, feel nothing about nothing. I think we're going to move to a different era. My hope is that um, all the men, particularly in this world, realize that feeling and understanding their feelings is the greatest strength you can ever have. Strength does not come from being strong, as every man knows when it comes to fitness and grit and career and achievement. It comes from overcoming the things you never thought you could. And that is an embodiment with an
Doing
arm
the hard things.
doing the hard thing, and that is
Yeah.
the American dream, right? That's the American culture identity, which is like, we go, we achieve, what can't we do, right? And if we're gonna say that we're this great nation, the next frontier of that, of doing the hard thing, is learning that feelings aren't so ugly. Feelings aren't un unstrong, and feelings don't make you weak. In fact, being a person who can sit with the hardest, most complex, heavy, painful emotional experiences in the world are usually the strongest. And I can't wait for that to be a belief and an understanding integrated into our culture, into malehood, into masculinity, particularly. I think that becoming a thing and understanding emotions, allowing room for them among men is going to be the frontier of evolution for our country and for our world and for our future.
Yeah, I get that. It's so interesting because I recently you opened up a little door here on this, so I'm gonna give my 2 cents. So when we talk about men and emotions and being able to see, understand, process, and to know who you are, where you're going, what you're doing, and the why behind why you're doing it, I think there's often a misconception that, especially in today's society, where they want men to feel and act more like women,
Mhm.
and that's not what we should be asking for, because when you recognize there's a very clear difference, especially because and it becomes much clearer when you get your testosterone right. I went through some medical stuff recently, found out my testosterone was like 163 and
Wow.
super low, but I'm fit. I take care of myself, but I knew something was off. I wasn't feeling right. This had been going on for 3 years since my shoulder surgery. Like my body just never bounced back and recovered. Couldn't figure it out, didn't know what was going on. Went
Mm.
through all this other stuff. They're like, "Oh, it's B12." Okay, so I took B12 shot for a year. Oh, it makes me feel a little bit better, but I'm still tired, I'm still lethargic, there's muscle wasting, like, what is happening with my body? So then I finally get the testosterone done, figure out it's low, we get it up to a normal range, and then all of a sudden, there's this shift at about 4 months in, 3 to 4 months, where your brain goes back to normal, and you're like, "Oh, yes, like this is good. I want more of this." And you just feel so much better. And of course, I did Tone God Ali, Fedosia agrestis, and tried to raise it naturally with food and exercise and sleep and doing the right things. And I'm not saying go get testosterone shots or anything like that. You got to do what's right for you. This isn't medical advice, but I can tell you there's a shift in the way that you operate, the way that you think, and actually in your level of assertiveness. And so when we get to this place where we're talking about emotions, it's actually you understanding again who you are, where you're going, what you're doing, and the why behind why you're doing it, and to stop freely giving away and outsourcing your well being to other people, thinking that the person that you're with in a dating relationship or a marriage is supposed to give you everything that you don't have inside of yourself. No, that's the inner work that you have to continue to do to focus on yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And it has to be the work that you're doing as a habit daily in each of those areas, just a little bit, a couple minutes here and there on each of these things, and you'll begin to feel more capable, competent, and confident in who you are as a person and the way that you show up. And then, of
Um,
course, there's all these other side things that happen in your relationships because you're doing those things. And that's the work. And that's what people should be looking for out of men currently.
I could not agree anymore if I tried. While I do believe there's something to us all having a common language, the male and female brain is different. There are
It's
different
different.
hormones happening
Yeah.
there are different hormones happening in different bodies. So I think that this is my addition to agreeing with what you're saying, which is even if you are a testosterone full being, you are a person with all your male hormones and all your masculinity and all the things that come with it, you still have feelings and you
Yes.
still have emotions. And in fact, having some of those deep masculine traits and experiences and hormones and behaviors are going to elicit even more feelings and all just cracking them up to be something you throw away or something you don't deal with or you just act on rather than feel about is going to prevent you from being all of you, regardless of what the feeling is. And if you want to really, people love to talk about success and empowerment and drive and achievement. If you want, as a man, if any man wants to be the highest achieving, highest value, most globally competent version of themselves, being able to speak every language of yourself, including the language of feeling, is going to allow you to achieve that.
Yeah, there's another side thing here because people really they want to push on that vulnerability piece where men need to be more vulnerable. And here's my pushback on that is you have to look at the other person that you're with and look at the family of origin and to see how they grew up, how they were treated, how they operated, what's familiar, what they had is consistent or inconsistent in their background and how they built relationships, how some of their other relationships may have ended if you know that information. If not, you can use your current status with your relationship to be able to understand that whole person that you're dealing with that's across from you and begin to understand their emotional capacity. And because we talk about vulnerability and they misunderstand it as, well, I'm going to trauma dump on you. And then there,
Mhm.
I was honest with you about everything about me, and now you know everything. And it's like you overwhelm the person, and then they go on TikTok and they make a video about the icks.
Yeah,
So that's a
that's
huge ick.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really, I think, learning what vulnerability means and what being vulnerable actually is, especially among men, I think is a game that needs to be played among men. I think the epidemic of loneliness among men in this world is enormous and real and something that needs to be talked about. And we can talk about vulnerability or emotions in romantic relationship, but I think it needs to start before that. I think we need to be talking about vulnerability with men among men and finding ways for not to not even trauma dumping on each other, but finding, just like you're saying, like male, female, men with men, like learning how to be vulnerable. I feel scared. Now, admitting fear is not a non-masculine trait. In fact, the strongest thing a person can do is allow for their that's why men walk physiologically, biologically, the most confident men walk broad-chested. They have an expansive, broad shoulder stance, and it's because they're exposing all their internal organs that if they got attacked in the world, they die instantly. It comes from a trust that they got themselves, that they can protect themselves, that they are safe among their community, that they're assessing who's safe accurately, and they're assessing accurately their own ability to protect themselves and trust themselves. And the same comes for your mental exposure, your mental stance, right? If you're able to practice being open and honest, and also still stand by your conviction that like you're safe and you're strong, even if you're exposing your vulnerabilities, the things that if someone really wanted to come and poke and cause harm, they really could do some damage. It's a practice, right?
Um,
Wearing armor doesn't mean you're strong. It actually means you're shielding yourself from something anybody can touch. Real strength looks like knowing you can have that exposed and you trust yourself, you trust the people you're associating with, and you know that you got you. And that's going to allow you to feel so much more safe and held. I think that's the practice, right? Learning how to expose the vulnerability among people you trust, especially men. That's the practice. And like learning to be like, I'm sad. I'm scared. I'm overwhelmed. I'm disappointed. And someone going, yup. And you go, cool. I know you feel that way. You know, I feel that way. And you still see me as a fully competent man. I think is a thing that I'm hoping is the next frontier of evolution as a culture and among even social media. I want to see men talking about male issues with men more vulnerably. I think it's the next coolest thing we can do.
So this is my men's group. It's called the Antares Society, and we run for 12 weeks, just started last week. So if
Awesome.
anybody's listening, there is a Discord that is free that you can get at the link in my bio for any
Yeah.
guys that are out there who are struggling. And of course, we recognize that the ancients had it right, and it comes down to know thyself. And when you can do that, you can navigate the world pretty effectively. Ciara, tell everybody how to reach you.
Real Talk Therapy on TikTok, and I'm Real Talk Therapy _Ciara on Instagram. And if you feel like you want some coaching, I don't take any patients through TikTok or Instagram, but I always take some coaching clients. If you have any relational distress, how do I get to where I want to go? How do I figure out who I want to be? Or I realize I'm not who I want to be and I want to know how to get there. Come find me. I take coaching clients. Shoot me a DM and we'll see what we can make happen.
Ciara, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure.